They used to say that tennis, the sport, was 90% mental and 10% physical. But science has already said, you know what, guys, you're wrong. It's actually 100% mental. Everything that we do on the court, everything that a tennis player does, goes through his brain first. And the way that person is thinking, the way a tennis player is thinking, the way a hockey player is thinking, the way an engineer is thinking, and the way a student thinks, it it affects his patterns, his mental patterns, and the way he moves, the way his body executes, as well as the way he mentally executes. The way an athlete thinks, and we're talking about, if that athlete believes that he can improve, if that athlete believes that he can win, that he can achieve the goals that he has, it affects the way he's going to move, it affects the way he's going to react and act, it affects the way he's going to run, it affects his strength, his speed, his reactions, the perception that he has, the way he sees things, the way he thinks, the way he processes what's going on around him. So the way you see it is pretty much the way you're talking to yourself. The way you see things, it's pretty much an inner language that we have, and that language is going to affect the way you perform. Whether you're a student, whether you are a painter, whether you are an athlete, it doesn't matter what you do. The self language, the way you talk to yourself, that reflects pretty much what you're thinking, affects what's going on around you, and affects what's going on around you not only mentally but physically. So it's very important for you to pay attention what kind of language you have, what which way you're talking to yourself. You want to pay attention the words that you use, the way that you talk to yourself, because that is going to have an effect on how you're going to respond to the task that you're doing. Whether that task is something physical like a sport, or it's something in school or at work, or a relationship. Everything that we do is pretty much happens in the brain. It has to be filtered through the brain. Rarely we do something just in the moment without thinking, like an impulsive reaction, which happens. I'm not a scientist and I cannot really tell you if that is something really the brain, if the brain doesn't really has any control on it, because it happens really quick. But one thing that I can tell you is that when you're playing any sport, you have a little bit of time to react, even in tennis where sometimes the other person is serving towards you, and that serve comes, and that serving is moving, that ball is coming, is moving towards you, sometimes at a speed higher than 120, 130 miles per hour. But you see that ball coming, and the little milliseconds that you have between the server hitting the ball and you receiving, when you see that ball coming, there is still something going on in your head. Everybody knows that the less we try to process what we're doing, at least when we are doing sports, is when we're more relaxed and we execute better. And it's probably the same thing when you're trying to do a task at home or at school, or anywhere else. If you practice, if you train what you're doing consistently, you get to the point where you don't really have to think too much about it. You have already created the process, the patterns. It becomes second nature. When it becomes second nature, you don't really have to try to control it, or you don't really have to keep an eye on it to see if I'm doing it well. You just do it because repetition creates the habit. So when the mind doesn't get as at least not as much involved that when we're processing too much. But the message that I want to send here is that we don't really pay much of attention to the words that we listen, that little voice in our head. And that little voice in our head is nothing more than something that we are creating and we are replaying. And the more we tell ourselves something, the more we are going to believe it. And the important thing is that you can change that. You can change the way you're talking to yourself, and you can change the message that you're giving to yourself. You just have to reframe it. You just have to be aware and be on time. As soon as you start listening to that voice, negative voice, self-destructive, that is attacking you, you gotta change it and start listening to something that is more positive words. Even though in the beginning it's gonna feel like I don't really feel it. You don't really feel it because you're not familiar with it. You don't really feel it because you've been listening to the other voice probably for years or decades. But that other voice, it started just like the new voice that you're creating right now from zero. And you just did it over and over and over until it becomes second nature, until you got to the point that you believe that is truly the way you perceive things. So pay attention to the way you talk to yourself. Pay attention to those moments. You have to be able to catch and anticipate. Okay, I know that these are the times when if this goes wrong, I'm gonna start attacking myself. It's good to anticipate so we can catch it before we start getting that negative feedback again, and we can rephrase it and we can shift it in a more positive, more encouraging way to talk to ourselves. I hope it helps, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.